writer for The Atlantic, Tim Alberta, and he's the Daily Wire co-founder. His new book is...
In a world obsessed with comfort, one man built a career out of making people uncomfortable. His name is Bill Maher, the comedian who turned honesty into both his weapon and his curse. For more than 4 decades, Maher has stood on stage and in front of cameras, not to make people laugh, but to make them think. He's been called brilliant, arrogant, fearless, and offensive, often in the same breath. When others bowed to the pressure of political correctness, he sharpened his tongue even more. When networks silenced him, he built his own stage. But beneath the sharp wit lies a man who has paid the price for truth. A man exiled from mainstream television, only to rise again stronger. A living paradox in the age of outrage. This is not just the story of a comedian. It's the story of a man who refused to laugh along with the crowd, who questioned everything, and in doing so, became one of the most polarizing voices in America. This is the story of Bill Maher and his lifelong war between truth and acceptance. Bill Maher was born on January 20, 1956, in New York City, a world of contradictions, just like the man he would become. His father, William Maher Sr., was a radio news editor, a disciplined, sharp-minded man who believed in facts and logic. His mother, Julie, was a nurse, gentle, empathetic, and rooted in her Irish Catholic faith. Between the news desk and the church pew, young Bill learned early that truth could look very different depending on who was telling it. At home, debates were constant, about politics, religion, and morality, the very subjects he'd one day turn into comedy. But when he was 13, everything changed. His father stopped going to church, a quiet rebellion that would ripple through the Maher household. The family stopped attending Mass, and Bill began to see how belief, authority, and truth were tangled threads in the fabric of American life. He grew up in River Vale, New Jersey, a quiet suburb where laughter was polite and rules were firm. But Bill didn't fit the mold. He was too curious, too skeptical, too unwilling to accept easy answers. While his classmates played baseball, he devoured books on politics and religion, sharpening the tools of a mind that refused to be tamed. By the time he reached high school, sarcasm had become his armor. He used humor not to entertain, but to challenge, to make people squirm and think. It was there, in those early classrooms and dinner table debates, that Bill Maher began to form the voice that would later shake America. The son of a man of logic and a woman of faith, destined to question both. In the smoky backrooms of New York's comedy clubs during the late 1970s, a young man with sharp eyes and sharper words began to find his rhythm. Bill Maher was not like the other comedians. While others relied on punchlines about daily life, Maher dissected politics, religion, and hypocrisy with surgical precision. He wasn't there to make people comfortable. He was there to make them wake up. Night after night, he stood under dim spotlights in half-empty clubs, testing the limits of what audiences could handle. Some laughed nervously, others walked out in anger. But every reaction, even the hostile ones, fueled him. He realized something vital. Laughter was only powerful when it carried truth. He struggled for years, living in small apartments, performing for drinks, waiting for a break that never seemed to come. But his relentless persistence and his unapologetic honesty began to catch attention. By the early 1980s, late-night talk shows started noticing him. His appearances on The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson, and Late Night with David Letterman, revealed a new kind of comedian. Articulate, fearless, and dangerously intelligent. Producers were intrigued and wary. Networks loved his wit but feared his candor. He wasn't a safe act. He was a ticking truth bomb. Yet Maher never compromised. He once said, "If you tell the truth long enough, eventually someone will call it courage." And that courage paid off. In 1993, after more than a decade of climbing from dingy clubs to television studios, Maher finally got the call that would change his life. An offer from Comedy Central for a new kind of show, one that could blend humor with hard truth. It would be called Politically Incorrect, and it would ignite a cultural firestorm. When Politically Incorrect premiered in 1993, television had never seen anything like it. A comedian hosting a panel where politicians, actors, authors, and even preachers could clash. Live, unfiltered, and unscripted. For the first time, comedy wasn't an escape from controversy. It was the battlefield. Bill Maher stood in the center like a conductor of chaos, calm, witty, and ruthless. He could destroy a weak argument with a single smirk, or silence a celebrity with a piercing fact. He didn't care about being liked. He cared about being right. Audiences found it intoxicating. Critics found it dangerous. And that tension made Politically Incorrect one of the most talked-about shows on television. By the late 90s, Maher was everywhere, hosting award shows, sparking national debates, and earning Emmy nominations. He was no longer the kid bombing in smoky clubs. He was the man who made America argue with itself. In an era obsessed with politeness, Maher gave voice to discomfort, to skepticism, to rebellion, to inconvenient truth. But fame came with a cost. Networks worried about advertisers, guests demanded edits, and angry letters poured in daily. Some called him brave, others called him reckless. Maher, however, believed that real comedy had to walk on the edge of a knife. "If you're not offending someone," he once said, "you're not telling the truth." Behind the scenes, the pressure grew. He battled censors, negotiated every word, and watched as the line between truth and taboo kept moving. He could feel it. America was changing, and soon, one moment, one sentence, would change everything. Politically Incorrect made him a household name. But in the world of network television, power is fragile, and freedom comes with a leash. That leash was about to snap. In September 2001, America changed overnight. The world watched in horror as the Twin Towers fell. And in that moment, patriotism became sacred, unquestionable, absolute. But a few days later, on his show Politically Incorrect, Bill Maher broke that silence. Responding to a guest's comment that the 9/11 hijackers were cowards, Maher disagreed. He said calmly but firmly, "We have been the cowards, lobbing cruise missiles from 2,000 miles away. Staying in the airplane when it hits the building. Say what you want about it, but not cowardly." The room went cold. In a country drowning in grief and rage, his words were gasoline on fire. Within days, advertisers fled. Politicians condemned him. ABC received death threats. Maher apologized for the misunderstanding, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. Truth, once his weapon, had become his undoing. By 2002, Politically Incorrect was canceled. The same man who once made America laugh was now being erased from its airwaves. He became a symbol of everything people didn't want to face: doubt, nuance, moral complexity. For the first time in his career, Bill Maher was truly silent. No cameras, no applause, no platform, just a man sitting alone, wondering whether honesty still had a place in America. Yet even in exile, he refused to surrender. He once said, "The cost of free speech is high, but silence is even more expensive." That conviction, stubborn, raw, and unyielding, would lead him back to the stage. And when he returned, he wouldn't just reclaim his voice. He would rebuild it, sharper, wiser, and more dangerous than ever. In 2003, 1 year after being silenced, Bill Maher returned. Not with an apology, but with a new stage, a new network, and a renewed mission. HBO gave him what ABC never could: complete freedom. And with that freedom, Real Time with Bill Maher was born. Gone were the network censors and corporate filters. Here, Maher could finally speak the way he always wanted. Directly, intelligently, unapologetically. Each Friday night, he dissected politics, religion, and culture with a mix of comedy, philosophy, and fury. It wasn't just a talk show. It was a battleground for ideas. This time, he wasn't just the provocateur. He was the moderator of America's conscience. Politicians sat across from him, forced to answer questions they couldn't dodge. Celebrities stumbled. Scholars argued. And Maher, cool, confident, relentless, stood at the center, turning conversation into confrontation. But something had changed. The man who once thrived on chaos had learned balance. He no longer chased outrage. He guided it. He began producing documentaries like Religulous, 2008, exploring faith and reason with the same sharp wit that once got him canceled. His goal was no longer to shock, it was to illuminate. Audiences returned, not out of curiosity, but respect. They saw a man who lost everything for speaking his mind, and came back stronger because of it. Maher had evolved from a controversial comedian into one of America's last true public intellectuals. He had proven something few in Hollywood ever could, that integrity can survive fame, and that even after the fall, truth still finds a microphone. In the decades that followed, Bill Maher became more than just a comedian. He became an institution. His show Real Time with Bill Maher evolved into one of the last arenas in American television where real debate still existed. Messy, uncomfortable, but honest. In an age of outrage, where social media turned every opinion into a weapon, Maher stood firm as the stubborn defender of nuance. His influence rippled through generations of comedians and commentators. From John Oliver and Stephen Colbert to Trevor Noah and Hassan Minhaj, all owe part of their DNA to Maher's style of intellectual rebellion. He showed that comedy could be both entertaining and enlightening, that laughter could coexist with discomfort, and that truth could still earn applause. Critics often accuse him of arrogance, of cynicism, of refusing to evolve, and yet that refusal is his evolution. He never aimed to please everyone, only to remind people that thinking for themselves is still allowed. In a landscape dominated by political spin and moral panic, Maher remains the rare voice who speaks without a script. Love him or hate him, you listen, because he dares to say what others only whisper. For every generation that values free thought over blind loyalty, Bill Maher stands as both a warning and a torchbearer, proof that truth-telling is not a career, it's a calling. As the years passed, Bill Maher learned that peace doesn't come from applause. It comes from understanding yourself. He never married, never settled into the rhythms of domestic life. Instead, he built a world on his own terms, surrounded by books, ideas, and the quiet satisfaction of independence. He often says that he doesn't hate marriage. He just doesn't want to lie to make it work. For Maher, honesty has always been his compass, even when it cost him love or friendship. In a business fueled by ego and illusion, he has remained disarmingly real. Away from the spotlight, Maher invests in animal welfare, environmental causes, and the defense of free speech. He lives in California, tending to his garden, reading history, and watching the chaos of politics unfold like a never-ending comedy show. He laughs. Not because he's detached, but because laughter is how he survives the absurdity. Over time, his humor has softened, but his clarity has sharpened. He no longer seeks to win debates. He seeks to understand why people fear truth so much. He's often said, "It's not that I'm smarter than everyone. I just refuse to be stupid on purpose." Now in his late 60s, Bill Maher speaks not just as a comedian, but as a philosopher of modern skepticism, a man who has seen the world at its most ridiculous and still believes in reason, dialogue, and laughter. His journey has become his message, that freedom is not about saying whatever you want, it's about having the courage to mean it. In a world that rewards silence and punishes honesty, Bill Maher chose the harder road. He stood alone night after night, under the harsh glow of stage lights, a man with nothing to hide and everything to lose. He never promised to be right, only to be real, and maybe that's what makes him timeless. For Maher, truth was never a slogan or a brand. It was a responsibility. He spoke when silence was safer, joked when laughter was forbidden, and questioned what others worshipped. Every controversy, every insult, every backlash only confirmed one thing, that truth still matters enough to make people angry. He once said, "The truth isn't mean, it's just true." And in an age drowning in outrage and noise, that simplicity feels revolutionary. Bill Maher's story is not about fame or fortune, it's about courage. The courage to think, to speak, to stand up even when the crowd sits down. Because in the end, laughter fades, fame fades, but truth endures. And as long as there's one voice willing to say it out loud, there will always be a reason to listen.